Howdy, Matt here. As you may remember from last month's episode, Rite Gud is taking this month off. We've taken out one of our book club episodes from behind the paywall to share with y'all. We're looking at Ionesco's Rhinoceros with Simon McNeil, and this was recorded in August of last year. If you like this and want more, the book club is available for $3 and up Patreons at patreon.com/RiteGud. That's patreon.com/RITEGUD. Last month's episode was on Catherine Dunn's Geek Love, and other recent books we've done include Alfred Bester's The Demolished Man, Yukiko Motoya's The Lonesome Bodybuilder, and Stephen King's Misery. This week, Kittysneezes is also proud to present the Infinite Danger podcast by KasmKave. Infinite Danger is a podcast chronicling the wildly successful Canadian action TV classic Danger Bay. All 40-plus seasons of it. Join your host, Will, as he breaks down each episode of the adventures of aquarium policeman Grant Roberts and his children Nicole and Jonah in the trillion-dollar franchise which continues to define the city of Vancouver culturally, economically, religiously, and geopolitically. You don't need to be familiar with the series Danger Bay to enjoy the podcast. Infinite Danger is available, much like Rite Gud, wherever you get your podcasts. And to whet your appetite, we've included the first 10 or so minutes of the first episode, The Sea Pup, Should I Be Worried?, at the end of this one. Check it totally out, and with no further ado, here's Based and Rhino Pilled.
This month's bonus episode of Rite Gud. For this edition of the book club, we're taking a look at Rhinoceros, an absurdist play by Ionesco. This play was inspired by the playwright's time in Romania when he was younger, seeing everybody around him, one after the other, turning into fascists and Nazis. And this was back in the day, so we're talking about, like, actual fascists, like card-carrying fascists and card-carrying Nazis, not the sort of poser, loser, imitator types that we have now. And this was happening especially within the academy.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And Ionesco's work in Rhinoceros was largely driven by seeing people within the school setting that he was in converting to fascism. It seemed like one by one, they all kind of fell down that rabbit hole. And this play was largely a response to that.
He wrote it a good while after the war, though. This wasn't during, this was written afterward, and I saw this interview with him, a really interesting interview, and he says rather sheepishly, I was not a hero. So he was not like a brave guy sticking up for it. He kind of had kept his head down to keep from getting killed, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that the context of this play being something that was written after the war is something that is important because Ionesco also did see both the initial conversion of people to fascism and also the horrors of how that all turned out and the ability to see in retrospect just how bad things got.
Right. Now, before we go into too much of a discussion about it, let's talk a little bit about the play itself. This is a pretty short play. Unfortunately, I've never gotten a chance to see a live performance, which is too bad because I'm sure it rocks. I've gotten to read it, and I've gotten to see there's a bunch of performances on YouTube, but to be frank, they're not very good. I saw this one, I think, from Ohio, and the guy they cast as Jean is very clearly chosen because he has rock-hard abs and not because he's a particularly good actor. It's just, well, you gotta run around in your underwear with a rhinoceros on your head, so you better be in really good shape. So they picked the guy who was in the best shape. Not necessarily the greatest actor. But I mean, good for him on being good at exercise. I don't know. So, there's also a movie with Gene Wilder. I haven't seen it, so I can't say if it's good or not. I don't know. But I am fond of Ionesco, or Ionesco, however you pronounce it. Because for some reason, my little, rural public high school fucking loved to do his plays. We loved putting on his plays, and yes, I was a drama kid. I'm not proud of that. I'm not bragging here, but yes, I was in drama club. And for some reason, our little high school drama club absolutely loved the work of Eugene Ionesco. And despite the fact that, it's French absurdism, that's supposed to be inaccessible and weird and awful, there's just something really delightful of shouting a bunch of nonsense. Like, yeah, the Bald Soprano, it does have all these, I'm sure there's a lot of philosophical stuff behind it, but there's a bit where you're just bellowing incoherently at each other, and to a high school kid, like, that's really fun. It's got a lot of overlap almost with that kind of cheese monkey randomness humor that's just completely intoxicating. So I really liked Ionesco as a teenager.
Well, I'll tell you, you're lucky that your high school drama club had such good taste, because I was also a drama kid. Mine was mostly either Shakespeare or Gilbert and Sullivan.
Boo.
Yeah.
We liked the weird shit. The guy who ran our drama club was this teacher who basically didn't want to run it, so he didn't really do anything. He would just sort of wander off to the woods beside the campus and smoke a joint while the students kind of did what they wanted. And what they wanted was French absurdism, goddammit.
It's a solid choice.
It was.
It's a solid choice.
It was, and they did finally perform the Bald Soprano, and it was really fun. They had a great time. The audience really liked it, surprisingly. Like, it went over great. It got a ton of laughs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, these are funny plays, like, and I mean, especially, like, I really like the humor in Rhinoceros, which is interesting when you consider how dark it gets, that it stays consistently funny throughout.
Yeah, it is funny, and then all of a sudden it's really, really not funny, but then it is kind of funny again in a really fucked up way, and which I think captures a lot of the weird feeling of seeing people fall into, like, fascism or fall down, especially, I know this isn't OG fascism, but something like internet radicalization. On the one hand, it's heartbreaking because you're seeing people that you really like falling into this, but then on the other hand, it's funny because it's like, look, you're looking at that, you're following these fucking clowns, you know, like, you look like at someone like Steven Crowder, and he's just an embarrassing clown, man.
Yeah.
He's just consistently dressing up in women's clothing, screaming, and shoving his ballsack at his male coworkers. Like, he's a clown, but at the same time, when a friend of yours or a relative is constantly, like, reposting or reblogging or sharing or whatever term you're going to use on your social media app of choice, it's like, oh no, not you.
Yeah.
Not you, man. You're not falling for this shit. How are you falling for this shit? God. In this play, little synopsis, it's a quiet little town, I guess a French town. People just start turning into rhinoceroses, one after the other. They just keep turning into rhinoceroses, and it starts with an interruption of one or possibly two rhinoceroses running past a cafe and causing a disruption and trampling a kitty cat. Rest in peace, Kitty.
Yeah, poor cat.
Poor cat. And it's just this weird thing. And then the guy our main character goes to work, and he's saying, like, yeah, there was a rhinoceros there. And they're like, no, there wasn't a rhinoceros. Yeah, it's in the newspaper. Newspapers are full of shit. And then a rhinoceros attacks the office where he works, and the fireman rescues them and is like, yeah, we got a bunch of rhinoceros-related incidents going on all throughout the town. It's like, the fuck? What? Mm-hmm. And I think that is the scene when it's revealed that the rhinoceros was a human. Like, it's not just an escapee from a zoo or whatever. It's their coworker has not shown up to work, but his wife shows up to work, and she's in a panic because her husband's not well. And then a rhinoceros shows up and is attacking things, and she's like, there's my husband! And the wife, Mrs. Buff, she is ride or die. She just jumps on that rhinoceros and goes away because she can't leave him. And it's this really funny, surreal, goofy, weird scene. And as it's going on, people are yammering about, like, silly questions, like, well, what kind of rhinoceros? Was it one horn or two horn? Is it an African or is it an Asian rhinoceros? And then, like, at some point it just starts becoming really disturbing. I think the scene with Jean in Jean's apartment is when it starts to turn. Like, it goes from being silly into being like, oh, fuck, that's really upsetting, actually. This guy's, like, trying to kill his friend. That's real fucked up. And it ends in this, like, almost like a post-apocalyptic zombie movie where everyone except Berenger and Daisy are rhinoceroses, and Daisy and Berenger are, like, pledging to each other, like, our love will save the human race. And their relationship, which was never this great love affair, it was never this great relationship, it was just sort of, like, casually dating. And the relationship just immediately falls apart under the strain of this, like, rhinopocalypse. And we're left in this alarming situation where there's only one human being left, and he's not a strong hero type. He's not...
Yeah.
We're going to talk more about Berenger in a little bit, but he's not like this... He is not, you know, Pedro Pascal in The Last of Us. He is not like a big, hot, you know, post-apocalyptic zombie daddy who's going to save the day. He's this really pathetic little man.
He just complains about headaches most of the play, and
he's constantly hungover.
Drinks too much.
He is just
Constantly
always hungover. He's just a complete fuck-up. Total slacker. And that's it. And that's kind of what we're left with. And the last line of the play, I think the translation that I have is, I will not capitulate. It doesn't come across to me. I'm sure it depends on how it's directed, and certain productions make it one way, certain productions make it another way, but to me it doesn't feel terribly inspiring at all. It just sounds like this kind of pathetic guy going like, I'll be okay. Like, no, you won't. No. You're fucked, Berenger. You are going to drink yourself to death in this situation.
Yeah.
So it's remarkable how this play manages to be really funny, but also really upsetting and disturbing, often at the same time, and it becomes less and less funny, and more like sad and creepy, but it's still almost a little bit funny at the same time, which it so perfectly captures that weird, surreal, horrible feeling when you do see a friend or a loved one start to fall down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly.
So why don't we talk a little bit about our hero, quote-unquote, Berenger.
Yeah.
He's a fucking drunk, as previously stated. He is a pathetic drunk. He's a fuck-up. He's a slacker. We see he's late to work. He's really disheveled. He's always got a headache because he's always hungover, and he makes excuses for his drinking, too. He's not really self-aware about his drunkenness. He's just like, I just had a little bit. Like, you're fucked up, dude. You're fucked up. He is a terrible boyfriend to Daisy. He's horrible. He's a piece of shit loser employee. And I love the detail, which is so depressing, is that he doesn't change into a rhinoceros, but not really because of courage, but it's because he can't. There's a scene where he kind of tries to take the rhino pill or whatever. And he's just like,
I like that.
He just can't. He just physically, it won't happen for him. This change is not happening. I kind of like this. I think it works a lot better than if he was this heroic, iron-willed Giga Chad who's like, I'll defeat all the rhinos. It's just this pathetic little man, and I think this is definitely coming from Eugene Ionesco himself. He said that when he witnessed the rise of fascism in Romania, he says, yeah, I really was not a hero here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that with how Berenger's portrayed, it really does give the sense that it wasn't a matter of an heroic resistance to fascism so much as simply, like, just not. Like, just not doing it because it didn't happen, exactly like you said. And I think there's this painful sense of being left behind and being ambivalent about his relationship to it, but also perfectly aware that it's not a good thing. Like when Jean is transforming and he starts talking about how they need to overturn moral laws and return to a state of nature, he's like, oh, that's not good. I don't like that. But he doesn't have the intellectual capacity or the strength of will to do anything other than kind of say, well, no, that's bad. We need to have some sort of a moral order, but I can't articulate what that is.
Yeah, he doesn't have a good argument against it. He's not philosophically or physically or morally strong at all. He, kind of sucks as a person. He just doesn't change just because he can't, and he just can't, and that's it. It's almost because of his weakness and failure that he can't change, and not because of any of his positive qualities, I guess. Maybe he can't become a rhinoceros because rhinoceroses don't drink. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe he's just too hungover. Maybe he's just too fucking drunk to be a rhinoceros. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just this sad, pathetic thing. And that breakdown he has at the end where he's he forgets what he looks like. There's this eerie moment where he's pulling up pictures and putting them around, and he can't identify the faces in them, and he can't recognize his own face. It's so creepy. You're just the end of this play is this long monologue where we're watching Berenger have this complete breakdown, and the fact that he kind of wishes he could do it, I feel it like a lot of really good media about fascism made by people who lived through that era does, I think, address or reference the seductiveness of it, which is not to say that it's good, but that there is some part of you that's like, that might be like, on the other hand, it might be nice to just be a big, strong, dumb fucking dipshit who doesn't make moral decisions anymore, because being a moral, ethical person with a conscience is really hard sometimes. And sometimes it's kind of like, I don't know, wouldn't it be nice to just be a total piece of shit and not feel bad about it? Wouldn't it be nice to just be a big, mean, violent person and never feel guilty about it? And occasionally I'll look at, like, I know this isn't OG fascism, but, you know, fascist adjacent, like, extreme right-wing artists and content creators and see, like, man, that guy's making so much money with zero effort and zero talent. Like, Steven Crowder was offered millions and millions and millions of dollars to do comedy that was not funny. Like, there's that really shitty right-wing country singer whose whole career was astroturfed, and he's getting propped up by all these, like, nerds in bow ties. There's Ben Shapiro was a failed screenwriter who's now making $1 zillion because, like, Peter Thiel or whatever billionaire psychopath is bankrolling his entire thing. Like, there are all these little hipster kind of counterculture right-wing fascist-adjacent movements bankrolled by, like, super wealthy sugar daddies. And there's this part of you that kind of thinks, like, wouldn't it be nice I could just quit my job and make whatever, be an artist, quote-unquote, all day if all I had to do was, like, say shitty things every once in a while. Probably be an easier life than what I'm doing, which is making art in my free time when I'm not working full-time, you know? Like, I couldn't bring myself to it, and I could never bring myself to it, but, like, occasionally it'll be like, I don't know, that sounds pretty nice, just to be Rod Dreher and, like, blog for a living and live among a bunch of strapping Hungarian young men while insisting that you're not gay. As long as you don't blog too much about other people's dicks, you can just keep that job and make 6 figures and eat oysters all day. Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, but then there's this hollowness to it all. I think that at the end of the day is where I kind of like...
Oh, yeah.
I can, like...
All these people are rotting from the inside. They're fucking miserable. Steven Crowder, holy shit, dude.
Mm-hmm.
It's like he's got a disease of the soul.
There was a thing I saw recently about Tim Pool.
Oh, God.
And he was saying that he's not even able to cuddle with his cat or show affection for his girlfriend outside of feeling some sort of domination.
Oh, God.
And I just was like, what a horrible way to have to live. Like, just like to imagine that you're reducing every single relationship, every moment of affection and love in your life to nothing but just commanding others. I wouldn't want that, you know?
Yeah, like, it's very clear none of these people are happy. I mean, Steven Crowder is such a glaring example, the way his marriage completely fell apart, because you see a man who... I mean, I'll say it, Steven Crowder is not a heterosexual man. It's very clear, but he has to pretend to be this dominant alpha male, and it's like, well, that didn't work for you very good, did it? You got a really shitty marriage that's over now, and you are being divorced in the most public way, and the entire world saw that footage of you telling your pregnant wife to get a miscarriage by touching dog medicine. Like, this is you. Or just thinking about, like, at least once one of Ben Shapiro's devoted listeners has tried to attack a synagogue. Like, goodness. I can't imagine being a Jewish man and one of your devotees tries to burn down a synagogue. I don't think many people could live with themselves if that happened. Like, I'm not even Jewish, but if a devoted fan of mine tried to burn down a synagogue, I'd be like, what the fuck, dude? I'd, like, want to die if that happened. I would feel so bad.
Yeah.
Like, I'd be catatonic hearing something like that. That would just freak me out so bad. I couldn't do that, but part of me, every once in a while, you'll get it. You'll get it like, man, if I would just... Why do I have all this fucking integrity? I could just fucking say some really hateful shit on the internet and make, like, millions of dollars a year with very little effort. It looks pretty good.
Yeah.
And a lot of a lot of media about fascism by people who lived during those eras, I think, does address or talk about that very uncomfortable side of it, which I appreciate. Because it is so uncomfortable to acknowledge that, but it's there. It's 100% there.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can look at something like Salo.
Mm-hmm.
And how, like, for all that those guys are just committing atrocity after atrocity. I mean, it's an adaptation of a Sod book. And not a comfortable play to watch in any way, shape, or form. But the villains seem to be having at least a good time for half of it. So I get what you mean, but also I think one thing that becomes really important when we look at a lot of this work that comes out of Europe in the immediate aftermath of the war and between like the 50s and the 70s is that they really have to as well address being the survivors of atrocity and dealing with the fact that so many people that they knew and liked either did or supported horrible things. Like, right. I'm thinking about like the number of people in the academic circles, folks like Camus, who was very influential on Ionesco, moved in. Like, how many of them had extensive correspondences or even were students of Heidegger? And then he turned into a Nazi.
Yeah, I think a lot, too, about that. I guess the equivalent of the baby boomer generation in Germany, like growing up with that, just knowing my parents did this thing. How do you grow up knowing that? Like, how do you take any of their attempts to raise you in a moral way seriously? That's gotta be so surreal.
And I think that is part of what feeds into this idea of the absurd that underpins absurdist theater, is this unmooring from moral certainty and this idea that life is simultaneously funny and joyful, but also just awful a lot of the time. And trying to find some way to capture all of that at once. And yeah. I really think, to a certain extent, with Berenger, that's kind of what this play is trying to do. And I think that's why it's so critical that he is kind of pathetic, is that you need somebody that can be funny and humorous and charming and also kind of awful.
Yeah. Yeah, it strikes me so much as a lot of the self-hatred of the person who, like, you kind of kept your head down and you survived. And you survived because you kept your head down, but you're looking at yourself and you're like, man, a lot of people who were a lot, like, better than me, a lot braver than me fucking died because they had balls and I didn't. Like, that's gotta feel weird, knowing that.
Yeah.
That's gotta feel pretty fucking weird. I just keep thinking of that interview where he's saying, I was not a hero. Just, oh, man. Mm-hmm. Ugh. So that's Berenger. That is our dubious hero, question mark. And I mean, he's really bad. He's not just pathetic, too. There is a scene where he slaps his girlfriend in the face. And, like, I know this was back in the day when domestic violence wasn't taken quite as seriously, but even so, it's like, oh, wow. Wow, that's real bad, dude.
It's clear within the play that you're not supposed to think that's anything other than...
Yeah, you're not supposed to excuse that. It's like, oh, no, you did a real bad thing, dude.
Yeah. Especially with the extremity of the situation, when that happens, he just shouldn't. And the play's really clear that he shouldn't.
Yeah, it's this really horrifying and uncomfortable moment. So he's just not in any way, like, strong or good or noble. He's just kind of a dirtbag, really, the entire time. And he's the one non-rhinoceros by the end of it. He's the one.
Yeah.
Presumably even the nice little housewife whose cat got squished probably turned into a rhinoceros if she didn't get trampled by a rhinoceros herself.
Even the Socialist Union guy.
Even this... Oh, God, yes. God, can we talk about that guy?
Yeah, let's do that.
Botard. Yeah, so one of Berenger's coworkers is this Socialist Union former teacher, very contrarian guy who's, like, staunchly refuses to believe in the existence of the rhinoceros plague at the beginning, and is just this a pain in the ass dude, and by the end of it, he's a rhinoceros. Dudard, the sort of good boy employee, is a rhinoceros. The Monsieur Papillon, the boss, is a rhinoceros. I found Botard being such an interesting one, and because his contrarianism and petty, so much of his principles were really about kind of having a chip on your shoulder and having this petty resentment for anyone else being more powerful than himself, which is kind of the way in. It was that little thread that this rhinoceritis kind of caught and just pulled and pulled and pulled. Oh, and it's so great, the scene where we don't see him transform, we just find out about it later, and was it Daisy or Dudard telling Berenger, like, oh yeah, remember Botard was really, really anti-rhinoceros. He's like, yeah, I really liked Botard. He was a great guy. Turns out he turned into a rhinoceros. Oh, fuck that guy. I never liked him. Just this, like, trying to reconceptualize. And I love the detail that Didard ends up changing just for a really petty reason, which is that Daisy won't go out with him.
Yeah.
That's all it took. But then again, like, how many dudes got radicalized because, like, I can't get a girlfriend?
The whole incel movement.
The entire incel movement is based on the pretty girl doesn't like me, guess I'll be a Nazi. Like, oh, God.
And there's a lot of people that have pointed out that a lot of fascism is effectively inseparable from misogyny.
Oh, yeah.
That you don't get fascism without misogyny in the mix.
No, not at all.
And so seeing that being expressed in the play, I think, is valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's eerie because it's, like, so real. And I know it's corny to say, oh, this play's so relevant in our time. But it does kind of feel like that, just seeing that kind of personality type. Like, your formerly weird counterculture, kind of crunchy boomer uncle suddenly, like, getting sucked in through Alex Jones. Mm-hmm. And suddenly become talking about how we should put immigrants in camps. And, like, oh, fuck, dude. Man.
Finding out that the local health food store owner was actually kicking back large sums of money to that trucker convoy thing that took over Ottawa. Yeah, like stuff like this is happening all over the place.
Shit.
So there's this question that it's something that comes up a lot, which is why do men fight their servitude as stubbornly as though it was their salvation?
Yeah.
It's a question that's shown up ever since, like, going back in political philosophy as far as Spinoza. So it's not exactly a new question.
Yeah.
That became, like, a really pressing question in the aftermath of fascism. And I think it's still one that is relevant, that you got all these people whose own interests they're actually actively working against.
Right. Speaking of cats, Harley was very upset about the scene in the book where a kitty cat got trampled. Yeah. That bit's so good, too, in how it's so sad and pitiful, because it's this innocent little critter that gets trampled, but then they hold, like, a cat funeral with a cat-sized coffin, and it's really kind of silly again.
Yep.
It's so effectively done, and that it, like, really is this sad, awful little thing, and then, like, suddenly it's kind of funny in a goofy way again.
Mm-hmm. And balancing that is something the theater of the absurd really tries to do.
Yeah.
Theater of the absurd is part of the avant-garde movement, but we do have to look at it as being its own special little corner of it. Because it's not like you have other, like Brecht, basically, like, straight up looking at the audience and saying, this is a play, you need to know this is a play, and this is what the play is trying to tell you. And Theater of the Absurd isn't really doing that so much. And instead it's trying to basically play your emotions like an instrument.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember this interview with Ionesco that I saw. He talks about how he was influenced by puppet theater. That puppet shows, like Punch and Judy type stuff, really informed his idea of theater. And for him, that is his idea still of what theater should be like. So in all of his plays, at least he says, he kind of treats the characters like puppets. They're these exaggerated, ridiculous caricatures, and they're sort of at the mercy of everything around them.
Yeah.
And they just sort of get bashed around and act crazy and yell.
Mm-hmm. And he uses some really interesting techniques, especially this happens a lot more in the first half of the play, where you get a lot of call and response, almost like a Greek chorus sort of element, where you'll have pretty much the entire cast all like repeating lines or shouting lines back and forth at each other, where it almost becomes very musical.
Yeah, it's great, and characters are having two different conversations at the same time, and they kind of overlap.
Yeah, and so from a purely kind of formal perspective, I really like a lot of what this play does with language, to use it in a way that isn't just straightforward two people having a conversation on a stage sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's terrific.
Mm-hmm.
I find it so interesting, too, that there is kind of, like, almost a little joke about wokeness in it, too. For a play from the 50s, there's a bit of where, was it Berenger makes a rather racially insensitive comment about, like, Asian or African rhinoceroses, and someone's going like, hey, come on. That's not cool, bro.
Yeah.
I was just kind of tickled that, like, oh, shit, we're still telling those jokes. They were, okay. I'm like, hey, cool. That's not cool. You can't talk like that anymore. Like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll have no truck with those racial questions. I think it was something like that is what he says.
Yeah.
To Berenger. Yeah. And then later that guy turns into a rhinoceros.
Right. Even the logician turns into a rhinoceros and it's still wearing his hat.
Yes. That's such a wonderful little... when they see the logician out the window and point out that they know that's him because he's still got the hat on. That is just this wonderful moment of kind of cutting the tension just a little bit so you can get a bit of a chuckle in before it goes back into the darkness.
Yeah, it's so effective.
And, I mean, this is a play where a lot of the action involves people watching out a window while something awful happens on the other side.
Right.
So the fact that you're dealing with that structurally and you're still managing to make it tense and to make it exciting and to make it humorous, it's a challenge.
Yeah, it almost kind of brings to mind Seinfeld. Like, you could kind of see, like, Jerry looking out a window and, like, he's still got his hat on. Kramer.
Yeah.
The rhinoceros is Jerry. God. Rhinoceroses?
Why are they rhinoceroses? I don't know.
They got rhinoceritis. Rhinoceritis.
That's a disease where you turn to rhinoceroses.
Yeah. The Master of Your Domain episode, but instead of masturbation, it's about turning into a rhinoceros. And George would be the one survivor because he's just too pathetic.
Yeah.
He's just too pathetic.
Yeah.
Elaine would absolutely turn into a rhinoceros. You know she would. She was very trendy.
Yeah.
Putty would clearly go rhinoceros. Newman would be like the first one to go full rhinoceros. That guy.
Absolutely.
He was terrible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That would be what would incite the characters to make the bet about who would be the last to turn to a rhinoceros.
Yeah. Elaine going in, I'm dating a rhinoceros. A rhinoceros, Jerry.
And, you know, now that you mention it, Seinfeld does use a lot of call and response humor too.
It does.
So maybe there's more of a thread there than we're thinking.
It could, yeah. I could see it. I could absolutely see this. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. I'd like to talk a little bit about Jean, our Berenger's much more like successful put together friend, alpha male Jean. And it struck me while reading this, there's a lot where Jean kind of needles Berenger about everything, about his lifestyle, about his diet, about his drinking habits, about his sleep schedule, and a lot about his clothing. He's constantly like, you don't have a tie? Hold on, I have a tie. Hold on, there's that great scene where he just pulls out of every pocket, like, yeah, I got an extra tie, I got an extra comb for you, I got an extra mirror, I got an extra that. There's like one thing that he doesn't have. He's like, no, I don't have like a shoe shine stand for you. I'm sorry, bro. But one thing I'm wondering is if it comes across differently to a contemporary American audience, because the sight of a man paying a lot of attention to being well dressed to a contemporary American audience is going to come across differently than it would for like a French audience of the day. I mean, aside from that one particular Twitter account that we all know and love, the workwear guy, for the most part, actually caring about how you dress as a man that much might come across as fussy and like maybe a little bit gay. But I think something I realized while reading this, like, no, this is a hustle grind set guy. Mm-hmm. This is like the present day American equivalent would be a hustle grind set guy. It's like, do you even live, bro? Where's your grind set, bro? Bro, are you investing? Bro.
The version of the play I watched, I think I watched a different version than you. Because I watched one with a very kind of stripped down minimalist set, and there wasn't really much in the way of costuming or anything like that, other than just the outfits they were wearing. And Jean certainly presented more like the put together professional who was neat and cared about his appearance, but because that was what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because it's a play, you're going to play it differently, and it's in a social context, so that's the kind of cool thing about live theater.
Yeah.
But I'm just sort of wondering about how it comes across. Because the version of it that I saw, it wasn't a super elaborate set, but I think it was very, very deliberate that the guy they picked for Jean is like the most muscular member of the cast. This very like alpha male, big, athletic type, because like this is what a man is supposed to be.
Yeah. And really, they make a good contrast between Jean and Berenger because of the fact that Jean is put together and is, somebody who presents success and presents being on top of things and being self-confident. Yeah.
He strikes me as the type of guy who would brag about how many books he reads, but they're all like those dumb self-help books that are all the same 5 tips over and over again. The title's like, Unfuck Your Life, or whatever. 12 Rules for Life. The Bro's Guide to Being Awesome. How to Epic Win Your Life.
I tried once to read 12 Rules for Life to do a critique of it, and I didn't make it past the first chapter. It was absolutely atrocious.
I could see you just bleeding from your eyes while trying to read that book.
The only reason I didn't throw it across the room is because I was using my phone.
Oh.
So I just deleted the PDF. No, it was badly written. I read a lot of psychology. I read a lot of philosophy. So when I say it was badly written, it's not like I just didn't understand the style. It was badly written.
Oh, that's not great. That scene where Berenger goes and visits Jean.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Jean, when Jean says, I've got one aim in life and I'm heading straight for it, and he just charges across the room straight at Berenger, and Berenger has to jump out of the way or else he's going to get trampled. It was shocking.
Yeah. And that even, we know he gets out of it somehow, but the scene doesn't end with Berenger escaping. It ends with Berenger trying desperately to hold the door shut while screaming for help. While Jean just slams against it over and over again, just trumpeting and bellowing. It doesn't end on it is in a way absurd and silly because it's an actor wearing a rhinoceros mask slamming back and forth, which is a very silly and ridiculous image. And I think by then he's in his underwear too. Mm-hmm. But then oh my god. This is his friend who always kind of dunked on him for being kind of a fuck up, straight up trying to murder him.
Yeah. And just pretty much out of nowhere.
Just out of nowhere. He was visiting him to check up on him because he was sick.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it.
Turns out what he was sick of was moral standards.
Yeah. And that it's striking that Jean is the one who goes and changes and not Berenger, because Jean is doing what he's supposed to do in his sort of bougie, respectable ways leads to it so well, that desire for self-improvement and that desire for strength. And it made me think a little bit about how much of this weird culture of men's self-improvement and fitness, so many fitness bros get into this weird fascistic mindset. And I'm not trying to say that exercise makes you a fascist. No, that's ridiculous. I go to the gym all the time. I fucking love working out. I love putting on muscle tone. But there is this weird type of overlap between, gym bro, I'm worried about how my muscles are going, and then into this extreme desire to dominate.
There's an interesting thread throughout the history of fascism with diet and health.
Oh, yeah.
Even going back as far as really early theorists who fed into fascism, like Pareto, and his obsession over breeding better peas.
Huh.
Have you heard of the Pareto principle?
I don't think so.
Okay, so if you do any business type certifications, you'll definitely hear this because it's all over the place in that space. But the Pareto principle is the argument that 20% of the peas plants produce 80% of the peas.
Okay.
Which was basically just because Pareto was using a small sample size and he just happened to have a couple of good plants. But it's been widely adopted as a truism. So Pareto was mostly a horticulturalist, although he was also quite a eugenicist as well.
Of course.
And he was an early thinker that kind of fed into a lot of Italian fascism. And a lot of what he was looking at was how to improve crops and how to selectively breed pea crops specifically to make them more productive, to make them give better yields, and also to make them give healthier yields. This carries on with the futurists, the Italian futurists, who were also quite tied to Italian fascism, had their own really weird ideas about how to rewrite the rules of cuisine that got quite silly with spraying perfume in people's faces while they ate lettuce and stuff like that.
Right.
And then Mussolini launched an entire revamp of the Italian diet.
That's why he fucking lost, man.
He messed with pasta.
Yeah, you're not going to separate Italians from their spaghetti. You can't do it.
So this is something that has always been part of fascism, is this obsession with health. It's something that some people have commented on, that this idea of this fear of contamination and this obsession with health on the level of the personal body easily translates to fear of contamination and obsession with health of the social body. Okay. So it's almost like the same thing that makes a person start going, oh no, I can't have seed oil because it'll make me, have too high estrogen levels. That impulse is almost like a microscopic version of fascism. Mm-hmm. And so it's not surprising that the people who end up kind of with the one also sort of gravitate toward the other.
I can see that. I know Hitler wasn't actually a vegetarian, but wasn't he like super obsessive about diet and health? He was like a really intense anti-smoker.
Yeah.
And then you have the sort of Silicon Valley freaks who are into health, but in very weirdly unhealthy ways. Like the dudes who are like, if I drink blood, I'll live forever. My favorite is that rich guy who's like, I've managed to reverse the aging process. And it's like, you don't actually look younger, you just look weirder. The one who took blood transfusion from his children and is also taking what he refers to as non-feminizing estradiol.
Yeah.
Buddy.
That guy's actually apparently stopped taking blood from his kid because he found out it wasn't working.
Oh, good.
That same sort of concern about contamination in food is all over Silicon Valley as well, with things like, do you remember that Soylent thing?
Yes.
Or the Juicero, trying to, they needed to fresh squeeze the juice, but it's actually just juice in a bag because it's all a grift.
In the outline, you jotted down some notes. You said you wanted to talk a little bit about desire and fascism. And Spinoza.
Yes, that was kind of where I jumped ahead a little bit with that quote, the full quote of which is, the fundamental problem of political philosophy is still precisely the one that Spinoza saw so clearly and that Wilhelm Reich rediscovered. Why do men fight for their servitude as stubbornly as though it were their salvation? Now, I don't know if your audience is likely to know who Wilhelm Reich is. He's one of my favorite weirdos. Wilhelm Reich was a student of Sigmund Freud's. He was a German Marxist. And I believe he was also Jewish. He ended up fleeing Germany during the war and landed in America, where he started working on a grand theory of everything that involved, I'm not sure whether it's pronounced orgone or orgone.
Oh, that guy who was trying to control the weather with sex energy?
Yes, the guy who was trying to control the weather with sex energy. That's exactly the guy.
Hell yeah. There's a Kate Bush video about that guy getting arrested.
There is, and the American prison system even back then was so horrible that his health suffered incredibly, and he died shortly thereafter.
Jeez.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, being a Marxist in the States in the post-war period wasn't exactly very fun anyway.
A Marxist in the States who was trying to control the weather with fuck energy. Like, yeah, the government's gonna arrest you, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're too cool to be allowed to live.
Yeah, they actually banned him from selling his books.
God damn.
It was intense. That's why he went to jail, was because he was told he wasn't allowed to sell his boxes, because he had these magic boxes that were supposed to cure cancer.
What?
And this guy was, at the time, he was actually one of the leading figures in light microscopy. It was very early in the discipline. He had done a lot of work isolating, I think it was cancer in blood cells, identifying blood cancers using a microscope, if I recall correctly. And so, based on those findings, he thought he was onto something. But then he kind of went off the rails because he was also a little bit crazy and ended up making magic boxes to cure cancer. And so he was sending these things as far as Hollywood, because there's a few people in Hollywood who were quite fond of the magic fuck energy idea.
Yeah, that sounds fucking amazing. Like, everyone in Hollywood would be in favor of the magic fuck weather idea.
Yes. And he was also selling his books of political theory, of psychoanalytic theory, and of magic fuck energy theory. And of the three, I'm not sure which one of those is the ones that the government was most objecting to. But he was told he wasn't allowed to sell the books. And then he told the American government that he was going to continue speaking freely. And they said, well, your books are crossing state lines, so this is now a federal matter. And he went to federal prison. So that's the Wilhelm Reich in that quote that they're talking about. Because one of his works of political theory that was back before he went a little bit nuts was called The Mass Psychology of Fascism. which was one of the earliest works looking at fascism as a psychological phenomenon.
Okay.
It's a fascinating piece of work that a lot of people tried to build on, including, of course, Deleuze and Guattari, because that's a quote from Anti-Oedipus.
Okay.
Which is Deleuze and Guattari's extensive critique of Freud and Lacan and fascism.
Mm.
And they were kind of looking at fascism as, and this is a bit of a simplification, but as being this desire to kind of pull everything back into the self and make everything self-similar. And so they saw this as being something that could basically arise in anyone, and that because of how they viewed how psychology worked, would arise in anyone at given times and places. And it's just a matter of it was one force among many. And the problem was when that force kind of took over and started driving the bus.
Huh.
Their argument for why people would do this, like fight for their own subjugation, was because by doing that, they could help to make things all more like themselves. By making themselves more like an undifferentiated mass, but also by forcing the masses to be more like themselves. So that's kind of like where I think with this play, we see a bit of that. First of all, we see kind of, because that call and response, kind of people repeating the same statements over and over again, because that's so prevalent early in the play before everybody starts turning into rhinoceroses, we kind of see how those roots are already there. And people kind of want to persuade everybody to be like them. But then they also start just turning into this undifferentiated mass of rhinoceroses that are very difficult to distinguish from each other.
Yeah.
And so I think there is an element in this play of that same picking at this idea of what people want from fascism is to make everything the same as them.
That makes sense.
So that was kind of where I was going with that, was also having an excuse to talk about Deleuze and Guattari, which, I mean, I would never do that, right?
I mean, any excuse to bring the fuck energy weather machine guy into the conversation is a good one. We love that guy. That guy rocks.
We love that guy. We love that guy. Any chance to talk about Wilhelm Reich, I always take. And the Kate Bush song is a banger.
Oh, it's great. The music video is really good, too.
Mm-hmm. And getting Donald Sutherland to play the dad was just inspired casting.
Yeah. It adds a weird layer to it, though, that it's about Reich's boy seizing his father's machine. It's like, well, knowing that he's harnessing the fuck energy makes this a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about that.
I mean, also remember he was a student of Freud's.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Just adds a whole nother layer to that music video.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. No, it's a delightful piece. It's one of my favorite music videos.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
Father being all proud because it's raining. He's like, I knew it. My son harvested the fuck machine. I'm so proud. I did it. I'm a good dad. Oh, God.
Yeah.
I will include a link to that Kate Bush video at the bottom of this, at the episode notes.
Now, my understanding is that Reich's son has always been very much kind of a supporter of his father and attempted to kind of preserve and protect his father's legacy. So there's also, like, as much of a weirdo and as much of a weirdo with specifically sexual interests as Reich was, I don't want to give the wrong idea that there was anything untoward with his kid.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
and honestly,
yeah.
I think it's, like, kind of great and charming that he was a weirdo in a way that's, like, not evil or harmful.
Mm-hmm.
He was a weirdo crockpot in, like, a fun way. He wasn't hurting anyone with his sex weather machine. It didn't do anything. It was fine.
One important thing to kind of understand about how science has changed over time is that when Reich was doing a lot of his early work, which was really formative on his later work, was still when science was very much in a grand theory mode. And so scientists would regularly try to tie all phenomena into something central. And that was largely what he was doing, because he was trying to take psychological phenomena that he identified, and he was trying to tie them together with things he'd seen operating inside cells with microscopes, and then he was trying to tie that to Aurora Borealis.
Sure.
That methodology is not one that people really use anymore for good reasons. But it wasn't that it was entirely deranged, even though it sounds bizarre and deranged now. It was that he was trying to find this great thread that would tie everything together. And he thought that was life energy, which he saw as being explicitly tied to the orgasm because of his psychological work.
Huh. Honestly, that rocks.
Mm-hmm.
I wish he was right. I wish that was the universe we lived in.
Yeah.
I want to believe.
Yeah.
So, Rhinoceros.
Yes.
Rhinoceros.
Should we talk about the absurd specifically a little bit, and how Rhinoceros as part of the absurd is part of a specific kind of brand of existentialism?
Yes, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so French existentialism was really heavily influenced by World War II. And whether you're looking at Camus or Sartre or Beauvoir, all these people and their work was trying to come to terms with this horrible event that they'd all been through. And Camus, in particular, was really kind of focused on how to deal with the fact that there was no moral order to the universe. The idea that there wasn't a moral order to the universe was just self-evident to anybody who lived through the war. You couldn't live through that and see all those atrocities, from the Nazi death camps to the firebombing of Dresden on the other side, too, and still believe that there was some specific moral arc that was built into how the universe worked. And so Camus was like, well, if that's the case, if there's no moral order to the universe, then why don't we just all kill ourselves? And he picked at this in a lot of different ways. And what he came down to is you basically just have to love it all. He said, what else can I desire than to exclude nothing and learn how to braid with white thread and black thread a single cord stretched to the breaking point? I like that quote because I think it's really what kind of drives home exactly what absurdity in specific was trying to say about the universe, is that there's no way of separating out the good and the bad. That you have to take in everything, and that all of it, the good, the bad, the funny, and the miserable, all has to kind of come together, or it doesn't come at all. Yeah. So you get the sadness of the lost pet, the cat that dies. But then also the funeral's kind of funny because it's this tiny coffin and they're all being so grave, and it's just a little thing. And I think that balancing act that this play does with emotions, I think, is really critical to an understanding of absurdity, because you have to do it all at once.
Yeah, and it's not easy to do.
No.
It is really fucking hard to strike that balance without sounding callous, or without sounding like you're undercutting the horror of it, or without defanging it. It's really, really tough.
Yeah. And so I think what I really loved about this play was that it did pull it off. And it is a very difficult thing to do. I mean, if a piece of media that comes out that's even vaguely existentialist, there's a very good chance that I've watched it or read it. And I'm often pretty critical of it. Like, I really, really wanted to like Everything Everywhere All at Once. But I don't think they'd read enough Camus. I don't think they really understood absurdity well enough for what they did in that movie.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I know that's going to be an unpopular opinion, because I know a lot of people love that movie.
People get a little intense about that movie.
Yeah, they do. I know. It's weird. Because, I mean, it was fine. It was a decent piece of entertainment. Michelle Yeoh's one of my favorite actors, and I'll watch her read the phone book.
Yeah.
But it's a testament to exactly how hard it is to pull that off. And to get that sense that you need to take everything all at once. And that's hard to do in art, because it's really difficult to cram the entire world onto a stage set. And this is a sense that goes back to the origins of a lot of existential thought. Like, even Nietzsche was, in his early writing, talking about how what made tragedy important was that by grappling with both the best and the worst of life, it affirmed all of life. It said that it's all important, it all matters, it's all something relevant. But then he said, and it's really hard to do. And this play manages it. It pulls it off. And it fits the whole world onto the stage, in a way.
Yeah, it does.
We have our panoply of very different people who blur through the play and eventually kind of all fall into this unifying mass movement of just being a rhinoceros.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we get this sense that all these people are people who live in the world and who have pets and who can be terrible boyfriends or fashionable, like men about town, and that, like, all those things are part of the same thing.
Yeah, especially I think in that first scene, the scene in the cafe, when there's so much hustle and bustle, there's so much going on in life. You got the housewife going back and forth with her cat, the grocer and the grocer's wife are trying to, like, make a little money off of her. There's the cafe owner, the waitress, just all these different people and all these different walks of life. There's sort of a community, and they're all kind of going about their business, going about their lives. There's the old gentleman trying to hit on the little housewife. There's his buddy, the logician, who's just being a nerd, and then all of a sudden a fucking rhinoceros just charges through and starts disrupting all of it.
And that sense that, like, that the whole world is this disordered thing that at any moment anything could happen, but that in order to understand the world, you have to take in that disorder and that possibility that everything could just be overturned. A rhinoceros could charge through the street and trample you. Like, notwithstanding the obvious metaphors for fascism and how people kind of fall into these modes of thought that this play explores, that idea that the only way to be able to live a good life is to take in everything all at once and recognize the interconnectedness of both joy and sorrow. That's really central to how this play is constructed.
Yeah, and it's such a contrast where we start in this exterior, it's a cafe, like it's a terrace or something. It's one of those French outside cafes where you just kind of hang out and sip a cup of coffee for several hours or something, I guess, which sounds pretty great.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, it's just Berenger alone in his apartment screaming. And there's just a bunch of, like, glowing rhinoceros heads going by. And that's it. That's it. And it's so bleak and eerie. I hope to someday be able to see a production of this live. I'm sure my high school was never able to put it on just because it's a little tricky to stage. Because, you know, you need the rhinoceros costumes, you need the rhinoceros props. There's a couple of scenes where you've got to apply makeup very, very quickly. And it takes a good bit of craftsmanship and a good bit of budget to stage it really well, at least stage it as the way it's written. The version I have, which I found was very interesting, that there's a ton of very detailed stage directions about how things are supposed to look.
Yeah.
Which is a little atypical sometimes of theater scripts that I've read, but Ionesco was very particular about how he wanted this to look, which, okay, I get it, I respect that. So unfortunately I haven't been able to see a live stage show of it, but it really is a terrific and quite a remarkable play.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it's really worth kind of giving attention to. I do encourage people to not just read it, although it is good reading it to see the stage direction, because that is unusual. And it is also part of what that focus on not just the words said, but on the other stuff happening on the stage is part of what made the avant-garde what it is. When you eventually get people like Artaud, who were literally like blasting bright light in people's faces and stuff like that to startle them. That comes from the same well of treating theater as being more than just the words.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a really important element of it, and the stage direction helps to point in that direction. But I also think it's really something that, like, watching one of the performances that's on YouTube, or maybe the movie's good, I don't know, would be probably something that people should do as well, just because I think it really is something that you have to kind of see.
Yeah, especially the scene in Jean's room just comes across so much differently seeing it staged.
Oh, yeah. And it's interesting, the two of us had pretty different experiences with the scene in Jean's room, because I was dealing with the one that had the very stripped down costuming. But the actor who played Jean was really quite good in that scene. And his body language changes, and he starts charging around the stage and bellowing. And it was really very effective.
Okay, maybe you should send me the link to the one you saw, because the one I saw was not very good.
Oh, okay.
So, no disrespect to them, they're college students, but I'm sorry, this was not... Maybe send me a link so that I can include that, so that I can watch it, and maybe our listeners can watch it, because watch a better version than the one I watched, okay?
Yeah, but just, it didn't have any of the rhinoceros heads or the costuming. It was all dependent upon...
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This one had some very good rhinoceros heads. I'll give them that. They had some terrific rhinoceros heads.
That also kind of points towards one of the joys of theater, which is how every company can kind of put their own mark on a work, eh?
Yeah. I could imagine why, like, making a bunch of rhinoceros heads might stretch the budget of your theater department. They're not terribly well funded, but...
I think this was maybe a professional performance that was recorded, but it was old. It looked like probably, if I had to guess, probably 70s or 80s.
Oh. I saw a French one on YouTube that looked good, but my French is terrible, so I don't know how well I could really watch it.
Yeah.
I get a sense that we are winding down since we've been talking for about an hour. So before we go, what would you like to plug?
I don't have much new at the moment, aside from my blog. My most recent thing is I wrote an extensive article about destituent communism and the Ranny ending of Elden Ring, which appeared in a recent edition of Seize the Press.
Oh, very nice.
So if anybody wants to read 6,000 word argument about why Rennie says the best thing to do with power is to put it back down again,
Sure.
then that's there in Seize the Press, and they are an incredibly good magazine that I always like to plug regardless.
Yeah, Seize the Press rocks. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you all for listening and supporting us. Be sure to check out our Discord, and until next time, keep reading and keep writing good, and keep not turning into a rhinoceros. Good night.
This has been Rite Gud with Raquel S. Benedict, hosted by Raquel S. Benedict and produced by Matt Keeley for KS Media LLC. Theme song by OK Glass. For comments and concerns, please write to us at ritegud@kittysneezes.com. That is RITEGUD @kittysneezes.com. If you'd like to support us, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/ritegud. This has been a Kittysneezes production.
Kittysneezes.com in color.
In Vancouver, by the seawall just around Science World, there's a neon sign that, in a light blue, says the words, "Should I be worried?" The sign is just next to the Cambie Street Bridge. Years before it was constructed, an artist, one different from the one who made the neon sign, painted the bridge's concrete foundation several shades of blue in horizontal lines. Each line signifies where the water will be 20, 30, 40 years from now as the sea level keeps rising alongside global temperatures. For what it's meant to portray, visually it's unintentionally calming. Several shades of a nice light blue, smoothly taking on a deeper shade as it creeps up the otherwise imposing concrete legs of the bridge. People pass by on regular summer walks, listening to public pianos and the lapping waves, unaware of what it all means. So when I looked at the unheated neon sign, framing an equally unheated omen painted on the legs of the Cambie Bridge, it was a heady swirl of thoughts about how meaning is immediately subsumed into the landscape without being metabolized, all the clear and present danger abstracted away. I stared at the neon glowing for a good long time. Should I be worried? Anyway, that's when the ambulance hit me. It hurt like hell, but I didn't break any bones. The guy driving the ambulance started yelling at me almost immediately. He asked me if I was blind, but I think it was pretty clear that it was his fault. He didn't have his siren on, even. I'm sure he knows so, too, because he bought me off with a gurney off the back of the ambulance so I wouldn't snitch on him for hitting me. The gurney is fun. Me and my buds like to ride it down steep hills at high speed, like a sort of improvised street luge. Still, getting hit by several tons of precision medical automotive did put things into perspective a bit. It could all end tomorrow, you only have one life to live, all of that. I turned 31 a while ago. I'd already been dreading turning 30 the year before because I'd already felt like I hadn't accomplished what I should have in terms of personal growth. Not much of a love life, not where I should be professionally. There are people now that I've watched have illustrious and creative careers, and I go, man, if I was old enough to have their experience, maybe in a few years I could be where they are. Then they tweet out, hey, it's my birthday, and then I find out that they're much younger than I am. And that's how I was feeling a year ago. 365 days later, nothing has changed at all. So, the ambulance has reminded me that I have one life to live. But there isn't really anything telling me that that one life I have to live is really going to be any good. The world presents itself to me as a series of doors that lock behind me the moment I cross through them, and I'm starting to realize I probably went through the wrong door about 300 doors back. There's really only one thing left to do. I think I'll start podcasting again.
Danger. 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 Danger.
Danger, danger, danger,
Danger. Danger.
danger! Anyone in danger?
Danger. Danger!
Danger.
Danger hasn't come home yet.
Danger! Danger! Danger!
I'm so afraid we're just never gonna see Danger.
She could be a danger to herself, Dad.
Be a danger to us.
Danger!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever episode of Infinite Danger, the show where we go on a deep, deep dive, episode by episode, through that iconic piece of televisual art, Danger Bay. Because you see what I did there, it's a bay, so it's a deep dive. Anyway, this is Will. How's it going? It's been a hot second, but I'm sure you remember me. It's a fresh new show, though, so I guess intros are still in order here. If you are a video gamer, if you are a gaming type of guy, I was big into the scene for Brink. I put out some pretty good lore videos about that. I did podcasts with a lot of people in the good pro-Brink scene. But, it's Brink. The scene's too big. There's not really any fertile ground. You sort of inevitably get edged out of the whole market for Brink content, no matter how popular the thing is still in 2023. So I made a switch and I started talking about film. I did a big extended podcast about the Kung Fu legend Bruce Lee. And I did fumble it a little bit. I mean, you got to try and get guests on your show, right? And I figured, well, you got to go for the big dog. So I said, hey, guys, Twitter followers, let's get Bruce Lee himself on the pod. Fans, give this post gas. Let's do it. Come on. So I was given some constructive feedback for that. And I figured, that's on me. That's my bad. I'm sorry, everybody. I ought to apologize. Let's get his son Brandon on here and we can clear everything up. And so I got a lot of feedback for that as well. Also very helpful. So genuinely, thank you. The main thing, I guess, was that people didn't really like that the podcast had all these ads and sponsors. But, I don't like sponsored content as much as the next person, but if you saw how much money Equigesic was paying me, they were doing this whole new product line. They had a new formula. They were just showering people in money, and, I took it. I don't really know what the uproar was about with that, so I'll just keep my mouth shut about that. And, well, look, making a podcast is more a learning experience than anything else, right? And I learned a lot, and I learned it very quickly. So, that's going in the W column for me. Thank you very much. It's still around somewhere. You can probably find an episode somewhere online. I made it about how smart of an entertainer Bruce Lee was for his time. So I called it Bruce Lee, the man with the abnormally large brain. Check it out if you can find it. And, of course, there was my political stint. I co-hosted my bi-weekly skewering of the news and politics, tearing it up alongside Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald. But remember, this was like 2016 Matt and Glenn, okay? Like peak vintage, like Chateauneuf de Pape, Taibbi, best fine wine Glenn Greenwald. None of the other stuff had happened yet, okay? I don't know anything about the stuff that's happening right now. If you're telling me that he's saying this crazy thing like, oh, did you hear what Glenn Greenwald said? Yeah, I know. I don't talk with him anymore, so you can just keep it to yourself, right? Just don't email me about it. So after all of that, not much. I just went into public relations. Nothing much to write home about there. Learned a little bit. But, now I'm back. I'm here. I'm back in the noble art of podcasting, and I'm ready to have some fun. So that's enough about me. Today we're here to talk about that venerable TV tradition, Danger Bay. So what is Danger Bay? Well, I guess that's a silly question to even ask in the first place. It's like asking, who is Mickey Mouse? Everyone listening to this probably already has the full collection of Danger Bay Funko Pops. They're busy planning a trip to see the Danger Bay theme park at Universal Studios, Islands of Adventure. And I mean, if you play mobile games like me, you've constantly seen that ad for that top-grossing iOS game, where a baby dolphin suffocates on the operating table because the player can't correctly do the match 3 puzzle. But I mean, this is an intro episode, so I figure I might as well get as much of a baseline as possible, just so we can move on from this. And this is a first for me, I've written notes. I think about what I'm going to say, and then I write it before I actually say it, and I'm sort of curious how this goes. So my notes start like this. In 1984, Canadian TVs were lit up with something truly revolutionary. Nobody had realized it yet, but the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, my country's national TV station, effectively entered its own age of Aquarius decades earlier than anyone else, gracing the world with Danger Bay, a half-hour family action series set in Vancouver, which happens to be my own hometown. This epochal shift in the televised arts was co-created and executive produced by Paul Saltzman. Saltzman was the scion of Canadian television royalty. That means a weatherman. But he sought something deeper and more meaningful. Saltzman traveled to Rishikesh in India, where he met the Beatles. He met some of the greatest creative minds of his generation and had deep spiritual conversations. He also talked with Mike Love. Saltzman came back from India and settled back into a TV career, running a production company mostly focused on documentaries. But then word came down from the CBC. CanCon laws demanded a show about Vancouver. Now, for you Americans out there, CanCon is a portmanteau of Canadian and condescension. The locals get restless, and you placate them with a program that tells them, we love you very much, you're very special. It's a winning formula, Think about it, you're living in Canada. You're living someplace cold and wet, your social services are slim, you can't make rent, and your credit rating is going down for reasons you don't understand. But then you turn on the TV and you go, the viaduct, and all those bad vibes melt away. Condescension keeps this nation from falling apart at the seams. Well aware of the gravity of the task at hand, Saltzman walked into his room with nothing but 86 sticks of incense and locked the door behind him. What happened in that room would later become a subject of much debate. What mantras were spoken? What substances consumed? Which sigils were drawn? And what muses, demons, or angels were summoned to open the wellspring of creativity? All we know is that 3 weeks later, Saltzman opened his door, looking like absolute hell, and then asked a question that would come to change the world. What if we shot someone punching somebody else on a boat, and then we cut to footage of an orca? After some screenwriters worked some plot and characters into the corners of that idea, in the end, the premise was a slam-dunk easy sell to the CBC. A wild animal expert and single father of 2 has action-packed adventures fighting poachers and polluters across the Vancouver wilderness, learning about the power of family along the way. It's incredibly clear-cut. To illustrate, among its many translations, Danger Bay's title in the German dub was just a translation to Adventure in Vancouver, and most people can figure out what the show will be about from just that name alone. Lots of shots of the ocean, lots of Pacific Northwest animals, plenty of lines where characters simply say that whatever you are seeing on your screen is beautiful. Basically a tourist's brochure from British Columbia with a few more boat chases. Canadian condescension in action. Parenthetically, though, some Germans did tune in after seeing the name Adventure in Vancouver, expecting a procedural about the bureaucratic side of copper mining, and they were sorely disappointed. But I mean, you can't really blame them for that. I mean, the Ruhr calls to these people, but I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's keep going.